for the inauguration of Mahmoud Darwish Center for Palestinian Studies. We still want to get him back to Houston, although I have a special affinity for Brown where he is. Anyhow, Abdulrazak has written many articles that appeared in leading journals, including the American Historical Review, Radical History Review, and Journal of Palestinian Studies. His book, Monsoon Revolution, Republicans, Sultans, and Empires in Oman, was finalist for the Royal Historical Society's Gladstone Prize for Best Debut Book in Non-British History. He's the co-author with Carmen Abusi of the Digital Humanities Project, The Palestinian Revolution, which received the 2019 Middle Eastern Studies Association of North America Undergraduate Educational Award. Professor Takriti, is all yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Eid. Of course, it's a great honor to be introduced by you, not only because it's your birthday, and not only because you're the winner of the biggest humanitarian award in the world of American surgery and medicine, which is truly a great deal. One aspect of the work of the Jerusalem Fund, of course, that Dr. Eid and others are involved in, is supporting these great medical initiatives in Palestine. And nobody I know has spent as much time as Dr. Eid on this. He is a true fighter for our people's health, which is essential for the continuation of their struggle and for their survival. So thank you, Dr. Eid, for everything you do. And it's a great honor also to be introducing this wonderful panel, which flows naturally from the previous panels that we've heard from today. We heard about the history of what's going on. Professor Masad traced the genealogies of the situation in Palestine. He showed how much of the language, the discourse, and the practices that are unfolding on the ground have been there from the very inception of the settler colonial project that culminated in the establishment of the Israeli state over Palestinian lands. We've seen from different panelists how this project has impacted the lives of the Palestinian people, how it's turned their everyday living into a daily hell, into a very difficult struggle that happens every minute, every hour. We've also heard about the human rights frameworks that exist at the moment, the latest developments that are unfolding in that sphere. But having heard all of that, there's still a question looming. What is to be done? And I think our panel today is very well placed to reflect on that question in different settings. We're gonna start with a talk by Ramzy Baroud, who is a Palestinian author, journalist, media consultant, and internationally syndicated columnist. He's the editor of the Palestine Chronicle, and he was a former editor at major Middle East news networks. He's the author of 6 books and a contributor to many others. I think if you've ever read anything about Palestine, you would have encountered Ramzy's name. He's very well published and his work is very well disseminated. He's written a co-edited volume with Professor Ilan Pape, Our Vision for Liberation, Engage Palestinian Leaders and Intellectuals Speak Out. He's also written a book under the title, My Father Was a Freedom Fighter, as well as several other books that were translated into multiple languages. He has a PhD in Palestine Studies from the University of Exeter in the UK, and he is a non-resident scholar at the Orphelia Center for Global and International Studies at the University of California, Santa Barbara. Currently, he is a non-resident senior research fellow at the Center for Islam and Global Affairs at Istanbul Zaim University. So it is with great honor that I introduce him today, and please give him a very, very warm welcome. I think you're going to have to come speak here probably, because I don't trust his mic. And we could end up with a dramatic situation. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for that lovely introduction. And thanks to all of you for being here, and especially to the Jerusalem Fund for their tireless work for Palestine. I've had the honor to being here before, and I am very happy to be back. When I was a child growing up in a refugee camp in Gaza, it was all about, as growing up as children, we all wanted to liberate Palestine. The whole liberation of Palestine was used in so many different contexts, not just as in, I want to liberate Palestine, but also as in, trying to undermine the work of someone like, what are you doing? You're going to liberate Palestine with this, that sort of thing. So this whole liberation of Palestine was happening to the point that at one point, every Palestinian child in Gaza, and I presume in most refugee camps in the West Bank, South Lebanon, and so forth, wanted to be a freedom fighter when we grow up. And then at one point, when I realized that this is really not a career per se, I switched to wanting to be a doctor who only treats freedom fighters exclusively. Of course, you grow up, you grow older, you travel, you read, you see the world, and you start realizing that the concept of liberation is far more involved. There is not a single action that is going to liberate Palestine. There are numerous actions and numerous efforts by numerous communities. And sadly, it will not be the Palestinian people alone who will be able to liberate Palestine, but the Palestinian people, with the solidarity and support and the intersectionality of numerous communities around the world, particularly in the global South, particularly the indigenous movements in the global South and the liberation movements in the global South. And I say this because I think over the years, especially since Oslo, even those of us who are against Oslo spoke out against it early on, or maybe later on developed the anti-Oslo political discourse. I think we are trapped. I think we're trapped in a Western discourse on Palestine. And even though we might recognize ourselves as radicals, progressives, liberals, whatever, what have you, we're still trapped in the same discourse. We're still using the same terminology. The whole debate on one state, two states actually falls within that. The whole violence versus non-violence. When did we in Palestine even engage in that debate? We resisted. Al-Muqawama is Muqawama. You do it in every shape or form. If you have a grocery store, then the day of the general strike, you shut it down. If you are a doctor, if you are an engineer, if you are a lawyer, if you are an ordinary person, you just immediately jump into whatever position, whatever location you have in society and do your part. And if you are a fighter, you fight. My father was a fighter with the Palestine Liberation Army. In my book, my father was a freedom fighter. I wasn't even talking about that, because I don't think there's a single Palestinian in that generation that didn't fight in some capacity, starting with the Fidaiyin movement in the 1950s, immediately after the Nakba almost, until today, Palestinians have been fighting. And it's not because of the Hamas, it's not about Hamas and Fatah. It has taken place through multiple generations, multiple ideologies. In Gaza in the 60s and 70s, the fighters were the socialists. With the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, Islamic Jihad joined in, Hamas and Fatah joined in later on. But these are all movements that just happens in time and place based on whatever reality that exists in Palestinian society. At the time, this reductionist discourse that we have constantly to justify ourselves. We're not all Hamas. We haven't all elected Hamas. that sort of thing. We also believe in peace and so forth and so on. But at the end of the day, Palestinians fight not because of their ideological orientation. They fight because they are oppressed nation, living in refugee encampments all around Palestine and the Middle East. They are oppressed. They are lacking every basic human right, and therefore they fight. Whether they are fighting under the Hamas banner, the Islamic Jihad banner, the Fatah banner, no banners at all, or under the Lion's Den banner in Nablus and Jenin and Hebron. It's a phenomenon that is going to continue to happen. If you are waiting for a peace solution to happen, once Palestinians put down their arms or whatever form of resistance they have, it's not going to happen. And I'm not promoting any kind of violence or non-violence. I am just telling you a reality. When people feel trapped, we feel like they have no political horizon, when they feel that everyone has disowned them, from the so-called international community to Arab countries that are normalizing with Israel, to all of these other political spaces, they're going to fight back. I remember when Oslo took place, rather when Gaza, Jericho was signed, before Oslo happened, I was still living in a refugee camp, and I remember how thousands of people from our refugee camp, Nusayrat, in the Gaza Strip, these are people who have been the epicenter of resistance in Gaza throughout the years. They were so happy and so trusting of the wisdom of their political leadership that they actually went in mass to the Israeli military camp that separates my refugee camp from another refugee camp. If you are from Gaza, you'll know what I'm referring to here. You have Nusayrat, you have Quraysh, right at the center of the Gaza Strip, and there's an Israeli military camp there that killed so many Palestinians throughout the first Intifada. When the Israeli soldiers saw them coming, they thought that they are attacking the camp. They were not. They came to celebrate the peace to be. They were raising olive branches, and the soldiers, the snipers, waited and they were about to start firing, but then they realized that it was a peaceful. But the point I'm trying to make here is just the immediate transformation that happened to Palestinian society. The moment they trusted that a just peace is at hand. Now we look back at this moment and we are not incredibly proud of it. But just the idea, and you get asked this question quite often, because you see, again, we are operating within a Western political discourse. So we constantly need to live up to the expectations of Western countries, of donor countries, of US-led international communities, and also we don't want to appear to be anti-Semitic, to be pro any sort of violence or terrorism and that sort of thing, to the point that we are losing track of our own narrative as Palestinians. If you tell a Palestinian, if you want to understand Palestinian history from a Palestinian point of view, by Palestinian intelligentsia, the Palestinian Authority and such, they always take you back to 1917, the Balfour Declaration. Well, guess what? We have existed for thousands of years prior to the Balfour Declaration. Balfour did not put us on the map with the whatever 140 syllables, I can't remember how many words the Balfour Declaration was. It wasn't the British mandate that put us on the map. It wasn't Israel and Zionism that put us on the map. In fact, we have put Zionism on the map because of this interjection that they had in our own history. And like so many other nations that came and left, the Zionists too are going to eventually leave. It's just sad that we are living into this moment in history in which we have to talk about oppression as an everyday reality. But if you look at Palestinian history in an expansive sense, you would realize that there's no reason to believe that this is the end of history. The Zionists will too move on. But that can only happen if we Palestinians take charge of many things. We need to take charge of our resistance. We resist the way that we Palestinians feel is conducive to our liberation and to our struggle. We can't live up to the expectations of anyone else, especially those others, no matter what we have done as Palestinians in the last, since Oslo was signed until today, they will never, ever change their perspective of us. That's just not going to happen. We pursued the political the political course in Oslo, and what did we get out of it? The settlements tripled, the settlers tripled in numbers. The kind of killings that actually existed prior to Oslo was, I mean, 3 minutes, that's it. Can I have 5? All right, thank you. It was the Israelis using metal coated rubber bullets and that sort of thing. Now we are talking about the genocidal war. Yes, genocidal war. They are bombing and they are killing in every possible way. And that was after Oslo, after we dropped any claim to resistance and we decided to engage in a peace process and make painful compromises and do everything that would make us amiable from their point of view. And at the end, we ended up with zero, nothing. Right? So we resist the way that we find conducive to our struggle. But the language we speak, and this is going to be my final point because of the book that just came out, Our Vision for Liberation. We, as Palestinians, and this is not an invention neither by me nor by anybody else, but the Palestinian people in Palestine, you see this new generation that we've been writing about this transition. There is a political transition happening in Palestine. May 2021, the Unity Intifada was a representation of something serious and substantive that's taking place in Palestine. From Sheikh Jarrah to Gaza, to now Nablus, Al-Khalil, Ramallah, and also Palestine 48. For the first time in many, many years, we feel like we are at the cusp of claiming a new language from Palestine. And I'm not going to romanticize and exaggerate. We are still far away from actually speaking in one voice. I'm not talking about Hamas Fatah. I'm not talking about political unity. That doesn't matter to me a great deal. What really matters is if we are to establish any kind of unity around what lines, what values, what principles. It doesn't matter Hamas and Fatah agreed to some sort of a unity government and divided a cake that they don't even own in the first place between both of them. This is of no consequence to the Palestinian people. The unity that we Palestinians need is the unity of language, the unity of action, the unity of resistance, and so forth and so on. So we wrote this book, Our Vision for Liberation, which is basically about 30 essays written by 30 engaged Palestinian intellectuals. This is based on the concept of organic intellectual of Antonio Gramsci, but also based on the actual experiences of the Palestinians, our prisoners, our Khalid Jarrars, the people who are living and fighting, like the gentleman from Al-Haq that you saw earlier. It's one thing to be a detached intellectual. It's a whole different process to be an intellectual who represents an actual collective phenomenon. And that's really kind of a step towards many other steps that many other Palestinians are also taking, which is the fact that we need to start talking amongst ourselves, and we need to impose our language priorities on everybody else. I can't remember who was the gentleman who raised the issue. I think it might have been you who raised the issue that, if we had a centralized PLO, it would have been, we insert the language, take it, leave it, it doesn't matter. We do what is consistent with our own political and collective priorities. I think, yes, we are yet to have that centralized leadership, but we as intellectuals, as activists, as organizations, we can in fact start creating that space that is neither factional nor ideologically based, with the hope of reclaiming the Palestinian language. So we don't constantly have to hide behind others. We don't constantly have to chase after small organizations here and there to please look into our case and please be fair in your language. No, we create the language ourselves. And I think this is, as intellectuals, this is truly a step in the right direction within that larger liberation of Palestine. Thank you.
Thank you, Ramzy, for this powerful intervention and for this reminder of the important role of the grassroots and of the intellectuals and of the activists on the ground in Palestine, as well as the importance of the language generated by them, and we really have to be attentive to that language. Now, it's a great honor and a pleasure to introduce somebody who's been very active here in the United States, Jinan Chehade, who is a third-year law student at Georgetown Law School. She is a co-founder and past chair of the Students for Justice in Palestine in Chicago. Jinan studied public policy and Arabic at DePaul University, where she was president of the SJP. She has also worked at the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division and the ACLU. Before law school, Jinan founded Hearts for Humanity, a national youth-led campaign that raised over $1 million for humanitarian causes. She's recently led a delegation of Chicago's youth organizers to Palestine, and she's the co-founder and co-president of Law Students for Justice in Palestine at Georgetown Law. So somebody who's really done a great deal of strong work for Palestine on the ground, in the grassroots, and please help me welcome her.
Thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you so much to the organizers of this conference for this very powerful and much needed event. I also am truly honored to be with the speakers here today, especially Dr. Baroud, who I have been following and looking at his work for a very long time now. So it is truly an honor for me to be on this panel. So today what I'm going to be talking about is the action aspect of our discussion today. I think one of the challenges we are facing today in the Palestine movement is really not a lack of knowledge, but instead an awareness of what to do with this knowledge. We've studied the PowerPoints, we've studied the statistics, the history, we studied the timeline, but how do we translate the knowledge that Dr. Baroud and so many of our speakers here today have shared? And this conversation is very important for me personally, because I think a lot of the things that the youth are struggling with today is kind of a feeling of helplessness. For me and for many others of my generation, we grew up in a generation surrounded by death and corruption. A generation when turning on the TV and seeing your people die is just a daily occurrence. And a generation where the loss of human life has risen to the point where humanity has just been reduced to mere statistics. I remember watching the news with my dad when I was 10 years old, and we were watching the bombing of Gaza, watching hundreds of innocents die. I remember watching the raids in the West Bank. I remember in that moment telling my dad to turn off the TV, begging him to turn off the TV, because out of that feeling of helplessness of knowing there was nothing I can do to ease their pain. And I think the sense of frustration that leaves you paralyzed is not only present in the youth, but in many of us here today. But I also remember that in that moment, little 10-year-old Jinan, a switch went off. And I realized that I could no longer expect change or simply ask for change, but I really needed to demand change. So today, I really want to talk about this idea of action and how we translate it into resistance. So again, I want to demystify this action because we hear this word over and over again, but nobody really tells you that 1, 2, 3 step plan. And first, I want to begin the discussion by talking about this question of what can we do or what is our role? And I really want to shift the lens of this question, because I think the assumption behind the question of what can we do or what is our role is really a misconception that you assume that somebody is going to tell you the perfect 1, 2, 3 step blueprint of what to do. I am sorry to disappoint, but I do not have that perfect 1, 2, 3 step plan of what you should do, because action is multifaceted and it looks different for every single person in this room. So what I did want to emphasize and talk about today is this overarching idea of resistance as a structure. And I use the word resistance because we know that action, big or small for Palestine, is a form of resistance. So to truly define resistance as a structure, I quickly want to talk about what we have to understand the concept of settler colonialism as a whole. And as we know, the entire premise of Israeli settler colonial project is that it's a structure, not an event. Patrick Wolf puts it that the settler colonies deploy several elementary options to eliminate the native as the native. So although we know the Nakba as the biggest manifestation of ethnic cleansing, we know that the Nakba is ongoing and it is a structure, not an event. So whether it be through settlements, land theft, putting hundreds of children in military prison every year, the lack of access to water, there are several elementary options that Israel deploys on a daily basis to eliminate the native as the native. So similarly, when I say a resistance of structure, Our resistance must also not be a singular event, it must be a structure. It must be continuous, collective, and sustained. Again, this liberation movement is not a sprint, it is a marathon. So again, when we talk about resistance as a structure, and Dr. Baroud touched upon this, it cannot be in one single space or one single field. It has to be in every single space that we occupy. It cannot just be in protests or on campuses. And every single person in this room has a role in that structure. So just as Israel deploys several different elementary options, we must deploy several different resistance fronts. So again, this action must be multifaceted and creative. So your day-to-day job, and I think this is a misconception, your day-to-day job, whether it be as a doctor or as an engineer or simply in an office building, is not mutually exclusive from your role in the structure for Palestinian liberation. And we have so many examples of people doing this in such creative means and using their field and their skills to push this cause forward. For example, as I'm sure you know, last month, the tech workers in Google and Amazon used their platform and their work to demand that Google and Amazon cut the $1.2 billion contract with Israel and its military. That is how we have to think of ourselves, as one collective body, all using different avenues, different resources to work towards this collective goal of liberation. So as I pose these events today, or these ideas today, I want you all to think that I am not directing it at the lawyer in the room, not directing it at the journalists in the room. I'm directing at each of you guys, and for you to think about how you can institute these ideas in your day-to-day life. So now that we've talked about this umbrella idea of resistance as a structure, I want to talk about the prongs of this resistance. First, starting with grassroots organizing and resistance as a structure. So if we're going to be talking about the structure, grassroots organizing is really the channel of this action and the veins of this resistance. And grassroots organizing, the mean by all of these ideas that we are going to be talking about today are manifesting. And I have learned this time and time again through my own work in organizing, that really grassroots organizing is the means of all these actions. For example, starting from my work at SJP DePaul in undergrad. And as president of SJP DePaul, we are not only able to hold actions and events, but we were able to start a national campaign regarding Professor Jason Hill. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar, probably not. This was a few years ago, but Professor Jason Hill was a tenured professor at DePaul who called for the ethnic cleansing of Palestine, the carpet bombing of Gaza. And it was because we had this youth platform of youth coming together that we were able to brainstorm, we were able to launch this national campaign that brought more and more people to the truth. But in SJP DePaul, we all looked around Chicago and we realized that there are so many youth doing such great work in the SJPs. And I think really the work that youth are doing on campus is a perfect model for this grassroots organizing. So we decided to be a collective, to unite. So we founded SJP Chicago, and SJP Chicago is now one of the most, or not the largest, organizing bodies in all of Chicago that is able to bring out 25,000 people to the streets of Chicago every single day for a week last summer. And that's not an overnight thing. That was work and mobilizing the people, because as we know, at the end of the day, this liberation struggle is a people's movement. And we know the power of bringing like-minded people, just like the people in this room, together to discuss and learn from one another and take action. From there, I went on to Georgetown Law. And again, it reignited in me the power of having grassroots organizing on campus. After the bombing last summer, I realized that there needs to be an organizing body on every campus. And that led to the founding of Law Students for Justice in Palestine at Georgetown University. And through that, we were able to hold actions and events and bring Mohammed al-Kurd all in the middle of the nation's capital right here in DC at Georgetown Law. So again, and I want to talk about like grassroots organizing. I'm not saying that everybody needs to fund SJP. I know there are many people that are not students in this room, but if you're a student and there's not an SJP on your campus, start an SJP. If you're a community member and you don't know what organization it is that works for Palestine in your community, search for it, participate, get involved, and get moving. Okay, so now that again, we've talked about this overarching idea of a grassroots organizing, overarching idea of resistance as a structure, talk about the prongs of grassroots organizing. I really want to talk about investing in your own learning and connection to Palestine. So again, for many organizers, and I could speak from my own experience and the people I've worked with, we often felt that our organizing was very disconnected from what was happening on the ground. We constantly were viewing the Palestine cause either from the Western misconception of the occupation or from statistics and catastrophe. So we decided to be proactive and to do something about this. So we decided to organize a delegation of youth activists in Chicago to Palestine, to learn from on the ground and to really connect with the people. And I could tell you about this cause and explain to you, but I'd rather show you a brief clip of our delegation to get a better idea of what that looks like. So I suck at technology, so I hope this works. Oh, is there sound? No. Well, you guys can just hear me for a second. I think it's on. Yeah, on this page. Oh no. Oh no. No. Anyway, I could just explain to you and show you at the same time. But in this delegation, it was honestly a life-changing experience for me and many of the participants in this trip. Because we were able, what was so amazing about it is that we were able to counteract so much of the settler colonial scheme that Israel has built. Something that I truly did not understand that I was there is that you can study the statistics, you can know the PowerPoints and the history inside out, but you truly do not know the occupation until you are there, until you see the manifestation of the ongoing Nakba and how it affects the day-to-day life of Palestinians. And as I mentioned previously, part of the settler colonial scheme is to dehumanize the people. That's why they beat the children on a daily basis. That's why they raided the funeral of Shireen Abu Aqli. That's why they continuously tried to dehumanize the Palestinian people. But part of this trip, we were able to put a face to the statistics we see every day. We were able to meet Fakhri from Silwan, whose home is about to be demolished. We were able to meet Suma from Sheikh Jarrah. We were able to meet Nisreen, the wife of Hisham Izzeh, who was martyred by the Israeli occupation forces in Al-Khalil. We were also able to meet with over 20 organizations in cities across the West Bank and also 48 Palestine. We're able to learn from them, connect with them, and truly understand their wisdom and understand how we can apply it on a daily basis here in the States. And that includes the 6 designated organizations as well, like Al-Haq and Bisan, and the 6 organizations. So again, I'm not saying that everybody in this room has organized a delegation. Some people don't have the means to go to Palestine, and that is completely understandable. But I want you all to think about today how you are rerooting yourselves in the land and its people, how you are re-educating and creating a means of connecting with the people and the land. And again, we thought that this delegation was so essential that we are also in the process of creating PalTrek at Georgetown Law to take students again to Palestine, to speak with the people, to connect with the people, and to learn what's going on in Palestine from the Palestinian people themselves. All right, so I hope I didn't lose you guys. Again, we're talking about resistance as a structure. We talked about the channels of grassroots organizing. We talked about rerooting ourselves in the land as one of the prongs of resistance. Next, one of the most fundamental and I think most important of this resistance structure, one of the most fundamental prongs of this resistance structure is pressuring Congress. I know this is something we hear over and over again, but this is something that almost every single organization and person that we met with in Palestine emphasize. And I believe that we as Americans, it is our duty to be on the forefront of this, because as we know, we are complicit, unknowingly and indirectly complicit in this ethnic cleansing that is happening. Every year, the US gives $3.8 billion in military aid to Israel, a total of $146 billion so far. And this number is truly only growing. Just last year, the House of Representatives they passed a bill that approved $1 billion to upgrade Israel's Iron Dome missile defense system. And as we know, if we cut the military aid, liberation is almost right after that. But again, I'm trying to be realistic. Resistance as a structure is a strategy. So where do we start? We began, there actually is a bill in Congress right now called HR 2590, Defending the Human Rights of Palestinian Children and Families Living Under Israeli Military Occupation, Act by Benny McCollum. This is the only bill in Congress right now that works for the Palestinian people. And it's simply saying that our US taxpayer dollars are not going to fund the occupation and the ethnic cleansing of our people. USPCN, which is an organization in Palestine, but also nationally, is having weekly actions across the US to pressure the representatives to sign on to this bill. Find out if your representative has signed on to this bill, and if not, really get working. Because voting in every election, big or small, calling your representatives, calling your senators, making our voice so loud that they will think twice before taking AIPAC's money or voting yes to an anti-BDS bill. So they know that we are watching them and they know that we are watching them, okay? The next prong of this resistance structure, and actually one of the last ones I want to talk about, is solidarity. As we know, this liberation struggle is a collective one, and our resistance as a structure needs to reflect that. When academics and activists across the United States talk about these notions of the interconnectedness of our struggles, it is not in a theoretical way, but there are physical manifestations of how our oppressions are interconnected. Starting with a deadly exchange. In 2016, Amnesty International published an article highlighting that the Baltimore police officer who killed the Black man, Freddie Gray, after arresting him, was trained in Israel. And every year, hundreds of police officers across cities in the United States are sent to Israel to be trained in the same tactics that are used against Palestinians on a daily basis. And actually, this was really interesting that I found, but after one of the chief police officers of the Atlanta Police Department visited Israel, they modeled their surveillance program of the city after the surveillance program in Jerusalem. So again, solidarity is not, there's physical manifestations that we have to confront on a daily basis in our resistance struggle. Ghassan Kanafani said that imperialism has laid its body over the world. The head is in Eastern Asia, the heart is in the Middle East, its arteries reach Africa and Latin America. Whenever you strike it, you damage it, and you serve the world revolution. And again, these are big ideas we're talking about. There are also everyday action that you can take in this resistance struggle, whether that be education and mentioning the names of Shireen Abu Aqle and Ahmed Manasra in spaces that they otherwise wouldn't have been mentioned. Engaging in BDS. If your office is bringing HP products or Sabra, talk to your manager, change that. In conclusion, I know this was really quick and I threw a lot at you guys, but I really want to sum up this discussion by keeping in mind that action is not a 1, 2, 3 step blueprint. I want you to keep in mind that resistance is not a single event, it is a structure and it involves every single one of us. So what is your role? Your role is to simply use the tools and resources and skills at your disposal to act. As I'm sure you all are familiar with the quote by David Ben-Gurion, "The old will die and the young will forget." But here we are 70 years later and none of us have forgotten. And it is up to us to not forget in every single space that we are in. I started this conversation by talking about this feeling of helplessness that I feel and many of the youth feel. But when I look out at the audience today, when I look at the speakers, when I look at the work that students are doing on campuses, I am no longer feeling helpless about our condition because I know we will make a difference. And this is clear now more than ever that it is not a matter of if liberation will come, it is just a matter of when. And that when gets closer by every passing day. Thank you all so much.
Thank you very much for these inspiring words and the great energy. I love the dynamism. I love what's going on our campuses. There is a big change taking place, and it's led by the Palestinian youth. And you've done a great job in representing that sector today and in reflecting on student work, but also different levels of advocacy. So now we're going to open the floor for a discussion. It won't be long because we're already behind, but it's not this panel's fault. So we will take this time, and Dr. Subhi will have to tolerate us. So apologies to you, Doctor. All right. Any thoughts, questions? This gentleman here, and then we have somebody at the front.
Yes, the first question I have is for people in the U.S. who are interested in food and others, what is the best mechanism? What is the best advice you all can give as to where we should be at? I know it's a multifaceted approach, but people are busy. And You only have so much time to put into it.
Okay,
Yeah, what is it?
thank you so much. Limited energy and so much to be done. Okay. Another question. Okay, so international presidents and their, what can be learned from them here in the US? Yeah. Okay, so Jinan, do you want to start with the first question and then?
Can everybody hear me? Okay, perfect. I think that's a very good question that we're all wondering of where we put our energy. What does this look like? And this is something I was really reflecting upon as I was preparing today. And I think the easy out answer is that, oh, it's multifaceted. We all have to be in different spaces. And that is true. That was kind of the entire point of my discussion, that we need to be in every space and circle. But I also think it's important to keep in mind that in the end of the day, this is a people's movement. And I think one of the most sustainable aspects of our resistance is investing in the people. So educating the people, mobilizing and organizing the people, because that proliferates into Congress, that proliferates into these institutions as we talk about. This kind of went into the last panel, but for me, I think these organizations and institutions that we talk about, like Amnesty International, all these things are just one tool, but I never think that liberation will come from those tools. So how are we keeping that in mind? That Congress will never fully be on our side. I think, again, we're working towards stopping the funding and stopping the aid, but do we think that there's going to be a moment where Congress is going to come out and be like, we want a one-state solution, we want land back? I don't know. Like, I don't think that's going to happen. So I think where to put our efforts, it's truly in the people. And when you put your efforts and your energy in the people, it channels through all these things into Congress, into rerouting ourselves in the land. But one thing, again, and I mentioned this, the importance of pressuring Congress cannot be underemphasized, because as Americans, we have a certain privilege to use, and that is using our resources to stop the aid of one of the most fundamental supporters of the occupation, and that is the United States of America. So as Americans, if we are not making this a priority, we have honestly failed.
So, okay, so this applies to the American model, and basically, Jinan, you're saying that there has to be effective grassroots mobilization that gets translated into congressional lobby. Ramzy, do you have any additions to that? Is there a responsibility for Palestinians on the ground in Palestine, elsewhere in the Chehade, beyond the United States? What can we do given the limited amount of energy available? But do you want to use that microphone maybe?
Yes.
Yeah, I'll use this. About people are busy and, life happens and what can you do?
Speak to the mic. We can't hear.
Okay. So this idea that people are busy is just really kind of, I pause there for a second, because indeed they are busy. But I spoke recently, I went to New Zealand and Australia, followed by a trip to Hawaii. Prior to that, I was in Kenya and South Africa. And prior to that, I was in Brazil. And all of these trips were to talk to the indigenous people of these various polities, Maori people in particular, but Native Hawaiians and so forth. I remember in Hawaii, I was invited to speak by the Ethnic Studies Department at the University of Honolulu. And there's a book that really kind of impacted my understanding a lot of how the discourse is so essential. The whole idea of reclaiming research, reclaiming the language, was a book by Linda Tuhai Smith, who is a Maori herself. It's called Decolonizing Methodologies. And I've mentioned the name of that book at the University of Washington and various academic institutions here. And I would ask people, did anybody read this book? And, unfortunately, maybe here in Washington, D.C. is different, but not a single person would raise his hand. When I went to Hawaii and I said, did anybody, every single member of the audience, all the native Hawaiians, they actually read this book. And what the book does say, it says that the very idea of research in the Western context is colonizing research. It was done starting with the Napoleon, expedition and colonization of Egypt and then Palestine to break down the native, to understand the native. So the language, the tools, everything we use, even if we claim it to be anti-colonial, is essentially inherited from that colonial era. And what she is saying that in actuality, for us Maori people, but for us Palestinians, for us any indigenous people anywhere fighting for their freedom, we have numerous forms of research. This dress that Jinan is wearing, this beautiful though, is a political statement. It wasn't a random fashion choice she made. Palestinian women do that every single day. Palestinian men do that. We have numerous ways of expression and numerous ways of expressing our of resisting. Cultural resistance is a huge component of the resistance that Palestinians carry out every single day. Back to the point of people are busy. When we engage with people who are sharing that faith with us, have that shared history with us, nobody is busy. It is essentially their very own struggle, right? Now, so this is why I'm saying we need to work with the Black community in this country. I was in Istanbul just a couple of days ago, and someone quoted Yasser Arafat completely out of context, saying, it was his last interview in Al-Muqata when he was held by the Israelis for a couple of years. And he said in that interview, Israel will not wipe us out. We are not red Indians. Okay, now there are so many weird things that we can, he wasn't exactly trying to be racist. That's the term they use for Native Americans. And he was just saying they have been wiped out, but we won't be. And I was shocked to see that several people in the audience, when someone said, we are not red Indians, they start clapping. And I said, what are you clapping about? Do you even understand how dangerous this notion that you disassociate yourself from your historical allies, the Native Americans in this country, the Maori people, the Native Hawaiians, the Native South Americans, and so forth. So when I say we need to work with these movements, these are the people who will accept us unconditionally. And this is part of the struggle we really need to be thinking
so Ramzy, intersectionality is the priority you're advocating.
It's absolutely, but it doesn't mean
I'm going to be a very mean chair, and just for the interest of time, you have another question as well here about that relates to the point we're trying to make, which is about how we can learn from international solidarity in other settings. Do you have reflections on that? I think she mentioned specifically Ireland.
Absolutely. And the same thing applies to Ireland, by the way. This kind of unconditional support and solidarity they have. So I think we need to explore these spaces before anything else. Once we have that strong solidarity movement, we build on it. The good news that now there's an organization, BDS is organizing in Africa. 25 countries in Africa have signed on the BDS movement because the Zionists are working very diligently in Africa. We cannot neglect any of these spaces because we have this strange idea that only Washington makes all the decisions and nobody else has anything to say. It's wrong, it's colonial notion, and we need to abandon it altogether.
Jinan, I have a question for you. You want to address that?
Yes, that's a great question. That's something I'm also trying to figure out. But I also did want to emphasize that in my experience working with students has been inspiring. I know I'm a student, but truly being in a student environment is incredible, because I think students understand that the idea of we can no longer remain passive about our condition. They are more bolder, more creative in their actions, but with that, there are obviously challenges. And I think the easy answer is like, oh, Zionist surveillance, and those are challenges, but maybe I got lucky, but in my experience in being on different campuses, students are navigating that brilliantly, navigating surveillance, Zionist pressure. I think where we face challenges is really internal, and I'll give you two examples. The first of which is reactive. I think I've noticed that a lot, including myself, we tend to be more reactive in our approach of every time something happens in Palestine, we're all out in the streets with huge, massive protests. But something that I'm trying to get students to work more on is being proactive instead of, so sorry. Something that I'm trying to get students to work more on is being proactive instead of reactive. So it's easy to go on the streets and protest when something happens, but what are you doing in between those times? How are you building your community and building the student and campus population? I think the second thing is burnout. And this is something that when I say to students, they see it right away, because again, students, they're students, they have lives, they have a job, but they are giving so much of themselves in these resistance spheres, in these organizing, they're sometimes not taking. And I personally experienced this where we are giving and holding events and sharing knowledge and doing this and that, but I didn't know where to take from. I didn't know where to get knowledge from. I felt like it became almost robotic, and that led to a burnout for a lot of students, including myself. So that's exactly why we organize this delegation, and that's why we want to make it a really annual thing, because students need to go on the ground. They need to see what's happening. They need to connect with the people and the land and learn from them. Because again, I feel like people forget that we're just students. We really don't know what we're talking about, including ourselves. Like, we learn and then we give it right away. But we need to invest in our own learning. And that comes from going on delegations like this, taking time to read, learning from people like Dr. Baroud. So I'd say those two things we're definitely working on, being more proactive and beating burnout.
Fantastic. We'll have a quick round now, and then we're gonna close this panel. Any thoughts quickly or questions? Yeah, Saeed.
Remind everybody that actually today is November 11th, which means about this. So remember that. And we were thinking, and then after the world, why I might remind you. Also, to remind you that the United States, however, for non-way, you are the U.S. Citizen Migration Institute, the same party, day in and day out, and they're not going to do anything. They come up with all these bullshit statements and ideas and so on. You know, the most recent one of all is the biggest bullshit of all time, which is that we want Palestinians and Israelis to have equal measures of justice and so on, which is a crock of shit. Okay, so they don't do that. So keep that in mind. And I say this because I want to respond to Jinan and to Ramzy. They both talk about the important thing, which is working with the grassroots and reclaiming the narrative, reclaim the resistance narrative. Thank you all.
Saeed, thank you very much for your diplomatic language. And I think we're going to end on this note, but I have one thought to share on this panel, which is that we spoke a lot about solidarity here and advocacy as it relates to solidarity. We spoke about intersectionality. What we did not speak about, and I want people to always think about, I keep repeating myself, I've been repeating myself on this point for a long time. A lot of our activists and intellectuals have been repeating the same point over and over again. Until we sort out our own internal situation, until we build a national liberation movement, it is not enough. Liberation cannot just come out of solidarity. Palestinians cannot just be in solidarity with themselves. They actually have to build their national movement. And that is the only pathway in the history of anti-colonialism. No people was able to free itself without creating its own movement. In our case, we have a responsibility to recreate the movement, rejuvenate it. And I hope that in future conferences, we'll discuss that more and more. I'm going to close by saying this has been a wonderful and very powerful panel. I was inspired by both our speakers. Please give them a very warm hand. Thank you.
This has been a fantastic day. I'm sorry. let's see. Is it working right? Okay, that's better. I would like to say a few words of thanks to people who have facilitated for us this excellent day of going back to the issue of Palestine, apartheid, which is what Israel morphed in 75 years and since 1948, and the last panel, which touched on now what. And I think that, and the comments which came up in the question and answer periods, which actually many times that's where the meat of the meeting and the most important part of the meeting is, at least for me, usually shows up. I'd like to ask to say a great thank you, a big thank you to our staff at the Jerusalem Fund and Palestine Center. Siham, Ruqayya, and Firas did an excellent job in making this day really one of the best conferences that we have had. Simple, straight, and to the point, as well as diplomatic language, which I saw people struggle to find the word, and non-diplomatic language that woke up everybody, freshened up the atmosphere. Sometimes it gets very stuffy in Washington, D.C. Thank you to the staff. This was a hybrid meeting. That's why you see much fewer people than I have seen this room where every seat was occupied. I do not know really what our virtual figures are, but part of our audience is on the internet, and whatever happened today, whatever was said today, will be on our page. Give them a few days, and those who would like to have witnessed it, usually you can see it at your leisure on our website at the Jerusalem Fund and the Palestine Center. I also would like to thank Dr. Eid for an excellent job today on your birthday. Professor Joseph Masad, this is his second time, as he alluded to, being here. He did an excellent job the very first time. We were so impressed. Subsequently, we invited him back. You have literally reminded us of what you actually said the first time that you were here, by simply creating and bringing us back, reminding us of the genesis of the creation of the State of Israel, and bringing us to what it has morphed into a non-democratic apartheid state that is espoused and hugged by the certain powers, but probably despised by the rest of the world. And those of us who read a lot about the Middle East and the State of Israel, we do know that that's a fact. The human rights panel, I think, was excellent. I don't think that they have showed us that Israel is an apartheid state. Human rights for the Palestinians they really don't exist. They are totally ignored, and so on. We shouldn't have to worry about it. We have a state, the State of Israel, as I mentioned a little while ago, non-democratic, and except they believe, and the West believes, that this is a democratic state, but that applies to non-Palestinians. The Palestinians are not part of that population where they care about. The last panel was really rejuvenating as far as I'm concerned. It reminds me of my days of several universities, University of Utah and so on, when I was a student, probably advocating what Jinan here. This is the type of energy that right now, when they tell me who's going to matter in Palestine, I tell them, forget about the leadership currently that's in Ramallah. This is the generation that's going to matter. This is the voice. And many times I used at Vanderbilt University, I told them, it's not my generation. My generation struggled and in some cases probably failed. But this is the generation that the world is going to have to deal with. And this is the generation that's going to matter. And this is the generation that's going to end up with a much better situation in Palestine rather than what you see today of what you know. Let's say finish with that. So you have been a fantastic audience, really. I think most of the people that we started with in these seats this morning are still here. So if you Friday afternoon, they have to leave, we fully understand that. Actually, this generation, this audience is much larger than what I expected from our, literally probably our first hybrid meetings, COVID, etc. So we've had a wonderful day. I think that we addressed the Palestine issue as it should be addressed, and in 2022, that leads me to thanking the task force that took the part of the executive committee, as well as Dr. Edmond Darib and our eminent journalist, Saeed Arafat. They did an excellent job. Please thank them. I thank you as an audience, and I hope to see every one of you next year. Thank you.